A pair of footmen greeted Ludmilla outside of the barricade.
"Welcome back, Lady Camilla," one of them said, and they straightened to present themselves.
"Did the others return safely?"
she asked. "Yes,
my lady,"
he replied.
"Lady Garnier has retired for the night, but Lady Corlin and Lady Wagner are still in the pavilion, if you wish to speak to them."
Ludmilla nodded and left him to his watch.
The men and women working inside the camp seemed to behave no differently than when she had departed earlier in the evening, carrying the same relaxed atmosphere despite what was going on in the countryside beyond. Walking past the campfire and the sentry nearby, she entered into the pavilion, stepping into the brightness cast by the magic light. Clara jumped when she appeared out of the darkness, stifling a light cry.
"You did that on purpose," her friend said,
staring at her wide-eyed with a hand over her chest.
"I did what on purpose?" Ludmilla said.
"Popping out of the nothingness like that," Clara said. "Your brothers did that as well, stalking around like cats. I should really buy you a belt to wear or something."
"I thought we decided that it couldn't be helped," Ludmilla said.
"Our entire family is a long line of rangers.
Moving this way is like breathing to us."
"Back then, at least someone had a chance of noticing you," Clara replied. "Even the footman guarding the pavilion didn't detect anything until I spoke just now." Ludmilla twisted around to look at the footman, who was stammering in an attempt to reply. She had passed by him along the way, not even a meter distant.
"It's not as if I was trying to sneak in," Ludmilla said.
"Why are you so jumpy anyways? Did something happen?" "Several of the relocated groups moved to hamlets nearby," Leanne said, "so that we were just discussing whether they would appear here to cause trouble since they're so close." "I see," Ludmilla said. "I don't think they would come after an armed camp. Most of them had the look of common laborers and such." "That's how it mostly seems," Leanne agreed, "but it's hard to know for sure. The Shadow Demon's assessments range from laughably weak to low-level fodder, so, while the general information we receive is mostly accurate, some specific things cannot be spoken for." Lady Aura had mentioned something along those lines a few weeks ago as well. While the young dark elf was an unfathomably proficient ranger, there was no one else near her level of skill when it came to tracking, physical reconnaissance and target assessment. According to her, the Sorceress Kingdom mostly relied on direct observation with powerful servants or through divination magic in cases when it could be applied, so Lady Aura constantly had her hands full with tasks only she, a few of her beasts, and a bare handful of others could do relative to the sheer number of powerful servitors at the Sorceress Kingdom's disposal. Shadow demons were no exception to this. Their ability to operate in the darkness undetected and get into hard-to-reach spaces with relative ease was undoubtedly useful, but their reporting was limited to directly seeing and hearing things, or stealing evidence that they happened to come across. They did not care to make inferences, nor did they have the knowledge or expertise to do so, and neither could they track their targets beyond keeping them in sight and tailing them. Even trails similar to the one that Ludmilla had found and followed to the Riastais border, which was one any decently trained ranger would have probably spotted, were mysteriously beyond their ability to notice. Recalling the field at the end of the trail, she withdrew the plants she had collected and placed them on the table. The loose pile looked not much more than a fistful of wild plants, but Ludmilla did not recognize it as any sort of crop cultivated by the farms in the region. "I found a field of these plants stretching north along the border a short distance from the highway," she said. "I have never seen it before. Do either of you know what it is?" Clara looked down with an expression that suggested she shared the same ignorance regarding the sample as herself, but a displeased expression appeared on Leanne's face. "This is contraband," she said. "I've only seen the processed form personally, but it matches the appearance of Lera in customs manuals." "Eh?" Clara blinked. "This is Lera? You've seen Lera powder before?" Ludmilla asked. "Yep," Leanne said, "too many times. A few times a week, our men would discover caravans trying to sneak it past Erantle to the Empire. We were hanging around 40 smugglers a week last autumn, but someone's really trying hard to get it going in the east. The Imperial authorities would keep complaining to us too, meaning that we didn't catch everyone. All we could do was show them just how many we were stringing up. There are so many desperate and oblivious idiots out west that they seem to have an unlimited supply of runners for this stuff. Did you find these plants while you were in town?" "No," Ludmilla said. "It was being grown in Riastais." So they're harvesting the ripe plants and hiding it on our side of the border?
Lian pondered the information, or maybe they're stealing the crops from whoever is growing this on the other side. We have no authority to act across the border, we can only deal with problems on our side. Did you find anyone?
I followed a conspicuously empty wagon, Ludmilla said. They stopped to load themselves full of this cargo before trying to escape to Riesties. It was only after I backtracked to see where it all came from that I found the field.
Lian tapped her finger lightly on the table as she examined the county map.
So they're using the Sorceress Kingdom as a shield against authorities in the kingdom?
No, that can't be right. This should be something from when we were still all a part of Riesties. Fields of Lera don't just pop up in a month. Whoever is doing this was using Ramposa's domain as a shield against retaliation from the neighboring territory for stealing their Lera, or just covertly growing it in the neighboring lands to keep themselves out of trouble, or get their neighbors into it. Or maybe they were going to use this to smear Ramposa's reputation and weaken his position in the royal court in exchange for something, or all of the above? I wouldn't put it past House Facet to orchestrate that sort of thing. I wonder how long that has been going on for, Clara said.
Would they dare to resume smuggling it through the duchy after merchant traffic returns to normal?
Now that we know that this is happening, Lian said, it would be nearly impossible unless they use unknown routes.
Assuming that they're as common as the undead servants you see around the city, shadow demons stationed at checkpoints can just pop into every wagon to inspect them for contraband if they can learn how to identify it.
If they can't,
they can always bring back a sample for customs officials to verify without the smugglers even noticing that it's gone missing. The Sorceress Kingdom's forces are much better than regular militia when it comes to using direct methods to enforce laws where the verdict is clear.
Ludmilla placed the Lera back into her belt pouch, and Lian spoke again. You're going to want to burn that so the seeds don't scatter all over the place, Lian said.
Don't be anywhere close or downwind when you do, though, you'll turn into an idiot.
I'm serious, Lian said gravely.
That stuff is used in places where human slaves are considered nothing more than livestock, so their owners get them addicted to Lera powder to ensure that their assets stay docile. If you're exposed to it long enough, you'll be reduced to livestock too. Some genius thought it was a good idea to market that filth in human nations. More to the point, they probably didn't even care about its effects. Half the smugglers that we sent to the gallows claimed that what they were doing was a harmless and legitimate business for a medicinal or recreational good.
Ludmilla tied the pouch shut, then she tied it again.
So, Ludmilla said, securing the pouch to her belt again, we've stirred up one side, and tomorrow will be Campbell's turn. Did anything happen in the past few hours that requires us to adjust our plans?
We're not even sure how large of a portion of Jacqueline's power this even is, Clara said.
We'll need to see how they react to our next visit, after we've cleared out these groups that she's sent everywhere.
After we visit Campbell tomorrow,
Ludmilla said, I'll remain near to his village with 2 shadow demons and start dealing with his underlings. The 3rd shadow demon will stay with you, just in case they try to lash out at us in retaliation.
How could they even justify that?
Clara said, would they simply act under the assumption that we're the source of their woes and come after us?
With few other parties to blame, it's possible that they might come to that conclusion, Lian said.
They could even rouse a mob or use their bandits against us and claim that they had nothing to do with it. Considering what we know, it's ludicrous of course, but this is the sort of tactic that would have worked back when our liege only cared enough to collect taxes from his faraway throne. All this information we've put together makes it harder and harder to see how they can be anything but what they've been rumored to be this entire time. Ludmilla frowned. Out of the 4 of them, Lian was the quickest to condemn what they had discovered in Facet County. Perhaps her experience dealing with a wide range of people as a scion of House Wagner had led her to develop a keen eye for making sense out of such details in a short period of time, or maybe her experiences contributed to her judgmental attitude. Ludmilla did not know her well enough yet to understand which it was. For Ludmilla, their time here had been a rather unpleasant process overall. Every stroke that painted a clearer picture of House Facet only served to further undermine what had once been her unwavering confidence that, to be a noble, one must surely also act how she thought one should. Hopefully this was not a common occurrence. Erantel only had about 24 nobles left. Ludmilla's train of thought led her in yet another unpleasant direction. If I arrived to investigate one of your fiefs, she said, how would you react? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, making her wish she had never asked. Only a brief moment passed, however, before Clara spoke beside her.
"I suppose that I would like to be informed first," she said. "I would be glad to have help rooting out this sort of thing if it ever made its way into my lands somehow, since I would never knowingly allow it."
"Same here," Leanne agreed. "I already mentioned how I didn't think we were able to catch every smuggler taking advantage of the traffic flowing to the Empire, so I've no illusions that my oversight is perfect. It would be nice to know what is going on before you pop up and drag me off into some dark hole, though."
"You two seem to be handling my new duties better than I am," Ludmilla sighed.
"To be a noble is to be bound to many things," Clara said, "and duty is foremost amongst them. I'm sure you already know this as well as we. It would be a bit unreasonable to treat you like some sort of villain for it."
"The more successful you are at it,"
Leanne added,
"the more our own standards are upheld.
It's no great loss to see crime and corruption eliminated, and rule of law reign."
"That's the problem, though," Ludmilla said. "My duty is to assist with Lady Shaltier's own. In this instance, it may seem like I'm upholding the law, but it is ultimately just a coincidence. My duty is to defend the realm, and uphold His Majesty's order, which just so happens to mirror the spirit of our laws. There might come a day that I may be duty-bound to act against someone for reasons that they never thought were wrong, or simply because he considers them his enemy."
"His Majesty has been benevolent in rule thus far," Clara said, furrowing her brow, "and has made great strides towards ensuring the prosperity and well-being of his subjects. Is there something you know that suggests otherwise?"
Ludmilla shook her head.
"Not that I know of. Lady Shaltier thinks the world of him. I cannot claim that I completely understand everything, but it might be safer to say that we should act as if he is an absolute ruler rather than one who is bound by law. We exist by his whims, so in order to continue existing, it is in everyone's best interests to carry out his will."
"Then the laws," Clara said limply after hearing Ludmilla's words,
"are instituted by His Majesty's will,"
Ludmilla said, "so he can just as easily replace them, if he so wishes. Even so, we are also bound to them as long as they stay in force, and so are the members of the royal court when it comes to the administration of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Due to the various interpretations of His Majesty's will, however, you may find some seemingly arbitrary things happening with no apparent reason or precedent." "Shouldn't Florine be awake to hear this?" Leanne said. "This is the first I've heard of the like. How can we hope to survive such a seemingly random thing?"
"All we can do is strive for positions which help us gain a better understanding," Clara said, "like Ludmilla has. There's no point in complaining about it. We were all at the mercy of His Majesty's whims the moment Rantel was annexed. The only way that we might be able to do something about it is in the ways we already know as nobles, through our contributions and our influence with the powers of the realm. Even if it is just a little bit, we can at least try to keep the worst from coming to pass."
"The strong do what they can," Leanne muttered, "and the weak suffer what they must, except that we're the weak, just trying to act as the strong."
"It's what we must do regardless,"
Clara said, "and we have a duty to our own vassals as well.
The only nobles who believe they can simply lead easy lives are fools."
"I wish I could enter under Lady Shaltier's service," Leanne huffed.
"At least she actually communicates with her vassals and Ludmilla appears to be flourishing under her."
"It's barely been 2 months," Clara said. "Our rapport with His Majesty may improve as time passes. We just have to become important enough to notice, perhaps."
"Well, let us know what that feels like when you get there," Leanne said. "In a few years, you'll be too prosperous to ignore. Florine and I still have a long way to go by comparison, unless we can find some sort of edge like you and Ludmilla did."
"Me?" Ludmilla was confused.
"Well, they've clearly recognized you for whatever reasons," Leanne explained, "and something earned you Lady Shaltier's favor. You'll have to tell us that tale one day."
"We've digressed from our current task quite a bit already," Clara said.
"Rather than chatting into the night, we should really get ourselves some rest." Leanne yawned involuntarily at the mention of sleep, and Ludmilla thought that Clara's words were more for Leanne's benefit than their own. Retiring to the carriage which she shared with Clara, Ludmilla lay staring at the ceiling of the carriage. Even at this late hour, she was not quite ready to fall asleep yet. Clara shifted under their sheets to turn and face her.
"Can it be done?"
Clara asked.
"Can what be done?"
The nuances and implications that come with your new duty scare me to death. Clara's soft voice shook. That we are so powerless that all we can do is wait to die if the wind blows the wrong way one day. I was so desperate to think of any way that could help, even a tiny bit, that I said what I did, but you know more about this than I. While it is true that His Majesty may make decisions that may result in drastic changes from the status quo, Ludmilla said, as long as it is something that doesn't immediately end everything, I think we can manage in the way that you described. Leanne thinks I have some sort of advantage, but I think you have an even greater one. While I cannot say for certain, it seems that every member of the royal court has their own preferences and interpretations when it comes to His Majesty's will. For instance, the Prime Minister might be more distant than we would like, but, after His Majesty's directives, I think that what she's done so far shows that she appreciates a smooth and comprehensive administration when it comes to her duties. The three of you are far better at this than I am. I can barely keep up with the tiny amount my own domain puts out. What you demonstrate through the management of your own fiefs will speak volumes to her, and you are far superior to me when it comes to the politics of the court. Just like you were granted new territories, Leanne and Florian should be able to as well if they can impress the idea that what comes under their administration will go towards creating the realm that His Majesty desires. Together, we can work towards impressing upon the royal court that we, too, genuinely seek to uphold His Majesty's will. And what is His Majesty's will? Though many weeks passed, Lady Shiltier's declaration still resounded clearly in her memory. It is the will of Ain Zul'Gaun, the Sorcerer King, that his domain stands as a beacon of prosperity and harmony for all the world to see. By the grace of His Majesty, we are afforded protection as his citizens. It is the will of the Sorcerer King that his people shall not want for shelter or provision, that his people are provided with the security and stability to thrive, regardless of their talent, occupation or station. Those who strive to serve under his rule shall be rewarded in equal measure. Those who dare to bring harm to what is his shall be granted no quarter. Clara looked at Ludmilla curiously through lidded eyes. Those are not your words, she noted. Who did you hear this from? They were the words of Lady Shiltier, Ludmilla replied. A declaration in an alley deep in Irantal, before a crowd of hundreds of frightened and desperate people. I wish I had been there as well, Clara murmured. If that is what it is, then. A shadow crossed over her friend's face. Even with this assurance, Clara said, looking her in the eyes, do you not worry that one day you will be turned against those you hold dear in order to carry out His Majesty's will? Do you ever worry about a day when your spear might be directed against me? Why such silly questions? You should know that this has always been a part of being a noble. It is not unique to the Sorceress Kingdom, they just have the power to ensure that the desired order is upheld. Ludmilla's lips turned up in a lopsided smirk. As for you, you are the very last person that I worry about when it comes to that sort of thing. For Clara Corlin is every bit as austere as Ludmilla Zaradnik. Ludmilla's smile grew teasing, recalling something she had heard recently in Clara's village. She raised a hand out from under the covers, poking Clara in the cheek. The radiant jewel of the Riverlands. That's just something the people came up with on their own, Clara said with a flush of embarrassment. Yet that is what you are, Ludmilla told her. A noble of radiant brilliance, a precious jewel that brings prosperity and wealth to her subjects. An angel made flesh, bestowing her benevolence across the land. Ludmilla withdrew her hand, and her smile faded somewhat. Yet, at the same time, people somehow forget, when it comes to the precepts of order, angels are every bit as unrelenting and ruthless as devils. Morning arrived, and the four noble women gathered to review the new information that had been collected overnight. They discussed their findings over a late lunch, deciding that nothing significant enough had occurred to alter their course of action. Departing the encampment, with Ludmilla present this time, the carriage made its way south towards Campbell Fassett's administrative village. It would be their second audience with the eldest son of the late Count Fassett. He had holed himself away in the barony that was once part of House Volkenheim's domain. As they had come from the city, he was actually the first between the two siblings that they had visited. Like his sister, he had been all courtesy and smiles when he initially received them, but his hospitality grew cold upon being delivered the will of the House of Lords. When it came down to their personal feelings on the dispute, all four of the visiting noblewomen actually favored his sister, Jacqueline, as she had at least stepped forward to take the reins of leadership over her house with her father's unceremonious demise. Campbell, on the other hand, was by all accounts a coward who had hidden himself away to avoid participating in a battle which, at the time, was considered a formality that carried little to no risk for someone in his position. With her martial upbringing, Ludmilla in particular had a very low opinion of him. Even though Florine had pointed out that it didn't mean that Jacqueline wouldn't have done the same in his position, noble women were not expected to attend battles at any rate, Ludmilla still thought him craven, actively avoiding the obligations which came with his station. Clara did not miss her dark glower. "I hope you aren't going to bite Campbell when you see him," she said. Florine and Leanne laughed nervously, their eyes flashing uncertainty towards Ludmilla. "It's not worth it," Ludmilla scowled. "I would never be able to forget the taste." After tracing the movements of his largest gatherings of supporters, Ludmilla would remove them one group at a time with the assistance of the shadow demons until the trickle of bad news created a convincing enough idea that he had lost the majority of his power. After his new reality sunk in, they would confront him one last time. If he still insisted on pursuing his hopeless course, he would be forcefully removed from his seat, along with any of his vassals to be detained. Leanne had voiced her opinion, saying that the whole effort was a waste of time and they should just drag both the siblings out of their manners since they were so obstinate, but Clara and Florine still wanted to give them a chance to forsake their old ways. After hearing her convey Lady Sholtier's words before falling asleep the previous night, Clara had become confident enough in their purpose that she was able to make light quips at Ludmilla. The improved mood affected Leanne and Florine as well. The two had still not reached the same level of assuredness as their seniors, however. "I can't argue with everything we've discovered so far," Florine said as the carriage rolled through the village on the way to Campbell's manor, "but should we really be doing this? This whole idea of dragging other nobles right out of their own fiefs, it's really unheard of. It's almost like those silly stories where heroes run around like crazy vigilantes meting out nonsensical caricatures of justice." "Well, unlike those vigilantes," Leanne said, "someone here actually has that kind of authority, as crazy as it may seem. Your territory didn't have such a problem with almost everything being off of the highway, but my lord father and his deputies had to deal with an endless stream of crooks like these trying to smuggle slaves, narcotics and other contraband to the empire. If there's a way to quickly and precisely deal with one of the sources of this blight, then that means I can put my own time to better use on other things." "You're making it sound like a matter of convenience," Florine said. "It is convenient," Leanne told her. "It's also right and lawful and free of charge." Leanne paused at the last and looked at Ludmilla. What you're doing is free, right?" she asked. "You're not going to have an invoice delivered to House Fassett for shredding them to pieces, are you?" The idea had not even entered into Ludmilla's mind at any point, so she looked towards Clara. "Should I be collecting dues?" "If it costs you anything," Clara replied, "you should certainly at least cover for your expenses." "Whoa, stop." Leanne held out her hands. "Let's see how this whole thing works out first before you start shopping for grim-looking stationery. I don't mind providing accommodations and such when you're doing your thing in my territory, but I'm half expecting House Fassett to go up in smoke here." Ludmilla felt the carriage shift as it angled up the incline leading to Campbell Fassett's manor. As well crafted as the magical suspension was, the carriage could not keep its occupants level when ascending anything beyond a shallow slope. Outside was a building with its grounds rapidly losing any semblance of having been maintained. Rather than the household servants that occupied the primary Fassett manor, this one was mostly dotted with several dozen rough-looking men. Florine drew the curtains on her side of the carriage closed as many turned their gazes towards the passing vehicle. Ludmilla glanced over them in return on her side. The men seemed to come from all sorts of backgrounds. Most appeared to be burly farmers, woodcutters and other sorts of laborers. Few appeared to carry equipment beyond crudely fashioned polearms, tools and the garb associated with their regular professions. A small group of more conventionally equipped fighting men stood in front of the manor entrance as the carriage rolled to a stop along the lane. 4 of the footmen interposed themselves between carriage and the well-armed men that came forward, while another opened the carriage door. Their threatening expressions loosened somewhat as Ludmilla stepped out, followed by the other noblewomen, and she inspected the men standing in the way. All wore chainmail over clean gambesons, their limbs were properly armored as well. Most had open-faced sallets or kettle hats, carrying themselves in a way that suggested they were accustomed to moving around with the burden of their equipment. An arming sword and a long dagger hung from their belts, and each held a 3-meter-long spear in a gauntleted hand and a kite shield over the opposite arm. Jacqueline's more lightly equipped footmen at the town manor did not have the same dangerous feeling about them. These were decidedly not regular members of House Facet's retinue, nor were they present the first time they had visited Campbell's manor. Considering their roughly uniform equipment, she thought that they were likely mercenaries at best and brigands at worst. Representatives from the House of Lords have arrived to speak with Campbell Facet. The footmen announcing their arrival clearly did not want to give their names to the thugs blocking the way. The 2 rows of men stood facing one another for a long moment, before one of the men barring the lane to the manor entrance stood aside and swept his arm out, bowing with a lopsided grin. "The good Lord'll see ya," he said in exaggerated tones. The noblewomen exchanged uneasy glances, not knowing whether he was attempting a proper welcome or mocking them outright. Watching the 2 demons stir in her shadow, Ludmilla stepped forward to accept the welcome before the standoff exploded into a one-sided slaughter. The shadow demons were explicitly instructed to act according to orders, but there was no telling what the limits of their patience were when it came to disrespecting representatives of the Sorcerer King's official government, and by extension the sovereign himself. A pair of their footmen rushed to get ahead of her, holding open doors and checking hallways as the man led the way. Unlike Jacqueline's manor in the town to the north, this one was sparsely furnished and decorated. The absence of a regular household was conspicuous, and traces of dust and dirt collected in the halls. "I wonder where all his servants went," Florian mused. Was that a rhetorical question? Leanne scoffed under her breath. Halfway down the corridor, they came to the entrance to the manor hall. Their guide opened the door and ushered them in with little ceremony. The noblewomen hovered at the poorly lit entrance, waiting for some sort of announcement, but were greeted instead by the skinny man seated behind the elevated wooden table at the head of the hall instead. "Ah, welcome again, my ladies," Campbell Facet rose with a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit today?" From under a mop of shaggy blonde hair, his blue eyes lingered over each in turn as they made their way before him. Lined against the oak supports of the room were 6 armed men, similar to the ones that they had encountered at the manor entrance. An additional pair of men stood along the wall behind his shoulders. The thick wooden door closed a bit too heavily to Ludmilla's ears, and both Leanne and Florian started at the sound. She saw a few of the men before them grin at their reaction. Clara was unamused as she led them forward. Ludmilla waited on them a short distance away, finding a place along the wall to watch the proceedings. "Have you taken the time to reconsider our offer?" she asked. Campbell's welcoming smile slipped off his face at her words, and he reseated himself, placing his elbows on the table and folding his hands loosely under his pointed chin. "I gave it some consideration, yes," he answered, his gaze slowly passing between them again. "But my position remains unchanged. This dispute is an internal one, and not even the entire House of Lords has any right to intervene. I have no interest in your attempt at meddling, and neither does my little sister, I reckon. Your empty threats mean nothing here." As the refusal was delivered in Campbell's self-assured tones, from behind, Ludmilla saw Leanne and Florian visibly bristle. Much like his sister, he only perceived their message as meddling and opposition. "I believe we're retreading old ground," Clara returned. "Our purpose was made clear the last time we met. We are trying to help the 2 of you to extricate yourselves from your situation, and I believe what we offer is extremely generous. The royal court will not share the same understanding and tolerance when they turn their eye this way." "Oh?" He raised an eyebrow. "Tolerance for what? Everything I've done here is well within my legal rights. As I said, empty threats. I am simply amazed that you can even stand here and continue with this embarrassing course of discussion." "And what of everything else?" Clara asked. It is no great secret what goes on in this domain," Clara said. "Do you believe the royal court's inspector will turn a blind eye to all of this lawlessness?" "Lawlessness?" Campbell said. "You know not of what you speak, Countess Corlin. My lord father and his vassals have always enforced justice in our lands. If the inspector from the royal court doubts this, all he needs to do is request the county records for his own examination." The nobleman drained his pewter goblet and set it back down on the hardwood surface of his table loudly. At the sound, a figure appeared from behind a thin divider that separated the Lord's dais from some unseen servant's entrance. Dressed in a simple garment woven out of undyed wool, a woman appeared cradling a clear decanter of wine. Long, green hair hung halfway down her back, with loose strands partially covering her face. They waited as she came forward to refill Campbell's cup. He did not offer any refreshment to his guests before she turned to leave. "That is the first of your household I've seen today," Clara said. "The last time we came, there were many others. Where have they all disappeared to?" "Their services were no longer necessary," he replied, "so I had them released from my service. This one is quite special, however. She has been a member of our household for as long as I can remember. It seemed a pity to let her go, so I kept her to attend to me and the men. She is quite remarkable, everything is handled with great skill." The corner of Campbell's mouth turned up slightly, and several of the men around the room chuckled. Clara's voice hardened as she pressed her line of query. "Did you release your servants, or did you sell them?" "My, who is retreading old ground now?" Campbell took a fresh sip from his goblet. "Slavery is illegal, is it not? House Facet abides by the law as upstanding members of the nobility. Let us not speak of such distasteful things." "This company of men was not present during our last visit," Clara pressed, "and they are certainly not your household footmen. Where did they come from, and how did you pay them? How will you continue to pay for their upkeep? With things as they are, your current incomes are nowhere near enough to sustain this rate of maintenance." "That would be my private business," Campbell motioned with his hand dismissively, "and none of yours. When this official from the capital arrives to make his inspection, he will find no problems with House Facet. The royal court would be pleased, even, knowing that my sister's ridiculous farce has been decisively resolved without need for their assistance." Clara looked to either side, but none of them had any clue as to why Campbell had said such a thing. "Ah, I'm an idiot." Even before he finished, Ludmilla realized that they had made a monumental blunder. She fought to maintain the serene expression expected of a lady-in-waiting, all the while wishing she could reach out and wipe the smug smile off of Campbell's face. How did Amelia manage to do this all the time? "What do you mean by this?" Clara asked. "It is as I say," he said with a patronizing smile. "Reports have reached me that my sister has foolishly left the town undefended, scattering her men into the surroundings. I know a golden opportunity when I see one." "We did not encounter any armed men on the road leading here," Clara said. "Of course not," he scoffed. "Sending so many armed men north up the highway would surely attract her notice. They were sent through the forest trails this morning. My men will descend on the county manor without warning, and that will be that. That woman never had any right to rule this land, and now she has proven herself unsuited to be its protector." "You actually believe that the royal court will accept this?" Clara said. "Of course," he replied. "I am the rightful heir of House Facet, and my foolish sister is nothing more than a usurper. Her rebellion is in flagrant violation of the laws of succession, and I am enforcing justice, as is my right." "And what of everything you've done to help finance these men to enact this justice?" Clara asked. "Do you believe that you will be forgiven for this?" "I have no idea what you are talking about," Campbell said. "This adamant insistence of yours is truly puzzling." "The officials of the Sorcerer's Kingdom will not suffer these games," Clara told him, "and they see more than you think. These old and underhanded ways of your house will work no longer. The letter of the law will not shield you from its intent. This is Riesties no longer, Camber Count." He cut her off, voice raised. "I am Count Facet. House Facet is the most venerable family in the duchy, and I am the Lord of House Facet. It has barely been a month since you've somehow come into your title, and I will suffer the patronizing tone of an upstart baroness no longer. You will show me the respect I am accorded, Lady Corlin." Clara's amethyst eyes narrowed as the proud words washed over her. Seeing her friend's reaction, Ludmilla steeled herself. "Where was all this courage when you cowered away from your duty in battle?" Clara's clear voice sliced through Campbell's bluster. The silence which followed barely lasted 2 seconds, but it seemed to stretch on after the cutting remark. All at once, Campbell jumped up from his seat in a fury, his face turning red, then purple, veins bulging over his temples. His maddened, bloodshot eyes fixed on Countess Corlin as he sputtered impotently for several moments. "Out! His shout reverberated around the hall. "Consider yourselves fortunate you are here as messengers, or I would have you stripped and beaten for your slander." Ludmilla rejoined Countess Corlin as Clara turned and walked away, calmly leading her entourage towards the entrance of the hall. Campbell's seething breaths issued loudly from behind them.
"Get out, now." Campbell's pewter goblet landed to the side of them.
The dented vessel bounced off of a wooden bench and sprayed its dark contents against the wall before clattering away. They returned to the carriage with the same, measured poise by which they had exited the hall. Ludmilla closed the door behind her as they seated themselves, and Leanne drew the curtain shut. As soon as she did so, Clara leaned over and buried her face in Ludmilla's shoulder tiredly. She felt Clara's tremulous breathing against her, suppressed since the audience with Count Fassett had grown ever more heated. Ludmilla placed a hand on her friend's back and Clara's tense form gradually relaxed, but she continued to remain where she was.
"I don't ever want to do that again," she said in a muffled voice.
"Why must these provocations keep spilling out of my mouth?" "I thought it was right on the mark." Ludmilla patted her lightly. "We needed to end that audience quickly, anyways. I was wondering if he would try to hold on to us there to keep us from doing anything about those men he sent out." Leanne reached up to activate the magical lamp above them, and light flooded the interior of the cabin.
"It was entirely worth it," she agreed.
"Watching you viciously take a bite out of that bloated ego of his was extraordinarily satisfying. I hope this will be the last time we have to deal with that reprehensible cur."
Florian's voice simmered.
"The first thing I am going to do when we get back is take a bath."
Ludmilla looked to Florian curiously. Like Clara, she almost always carried a gentle disposition, so what was said amounted to strong language for her.
"I'm sure we all feel that way about Campbell Fassett," Ludmilla said, "but that's quite the livid statement coming from you." "All of the men were getting their fill of her," Leanne explained, "even Campbell Fassett. I'm pretty sure half of the brigands in that hall were leering at her the entire time. Her lascivious nickname is well earned."
"What nickname would that be?" Ludmilla asked.
"Lee." Florine started and turned towards her friend, wide-eyed, but she couldn't stop her in time. "Mistress of Fertile Hills," Leanne answered with an impish smile. "In our territories, at least. Maybe the city too." Her face painted with an entirely displeased look. Florine hit Leanne several times on the arm, and Ludmilla noted the ample curves of the younger noblewoman's bosom bouncing beneath her baggy blouse as she flailed away. They did not miss her look. "See?" Leanne laughed. "They don't even mean ill by it, Florine. You're the very embodiment of everyone's hopes and dreams." "Or?" Florine fell back onto her seat and shrunk into herself.
"It's outrageous, isn't it?"
Leanne said. "She's the youngest amongst us, yet she has the most generous figure. Whenever we're out together, I can't even get the time of day from any of the men that we come across. It's always welcome, Lady Garnier, yes, Lady Garnier, and of course, Lady Garnier as we step over and around all the puddles of drool that she leaves in her wake. I bet she secretly likes all the attention, as well." As Leanne leaned forward and spoke in low tones at the last, a horrified expression painted Florine's face. "I do not," Florine protested. "I don't flaunt myself like some. "Oh, that just makes it even worse." Leanne rolled her eyes. "I always tell her it's an advantage she should exploit, but she keeps hiding herself away in the most unflattering outfits, just like this one she's wearing right now. Or maybe she knows exactly what she's doing. The more conservative her dress becomes, the more suggestive everything else about her seems. You know, I would pay good coin to have at least half. Well, I still have a chance, I think. Ludmilla here is pretty much doomed. How did I get caught up in this?" She felt a stirring at her breast. "This is pretty hard," Clara said. Ludmilla grasped Countess Corlin by the nape of her collar and peeled her off. She reached into the space between the apron of her kirtle and her blouse. "That wasn't me," she said, holding up the white mask of unknown material. Ludmilla had carried around the mask that Lady Shortier lent to her every waking hour, but for the life of her she still could not figure out what she was supposed to do with it. Its empty eyes leered back, as if mocking her for her ignorance. "Well, what do we do now?" Clara said as she looked towards her. "Our plan has gone horribly awry, I think." "That was my fault," Ludmilla furrowed her brow. I was convinced that Campbell was so much of a coward that he would continue to hide behind the protection of his men, but he had no issues sending them to attack his sister when he sensed that he had an advantage. We inadvertently cleared the way for him, and I was completely caught up in our own moves to realize what we had done. Ludmilla's mouth twisted as she reviewed the sequence of events. It should have been plainly apparent that the breach in Jacqueline's defenses would have invited an attack from the forces right next door, but she had allowed her opinion of the Facet siblings to blind her to such an obvious outcome. With the notion about her having abilities associated with commanding armies and leading them like the legendary figures of yore, the simple blunder made her feel the furthest thing from it. Her mind worked to salvage the days of their efforts which threatened to fall apart within hours. To be fair, Florine said across from her, we didn't know he had those men. When we arrived on the first day, he had a regular-looking household staff. There is no fair, Ludmilla replied. There are only our moves and theirs, and what happens as a result. We cannot politely ask Campbell Facet, pleading our own ignorance, to recall his men so we can try again. All we can do is make the best decisions that we can in light of this new development. Ludmilla stood up and reached over Florine to open the driver window. Halfway in doing so, she stopped and reseated herself. Driver, she focused on the man seated on the other side of the glass. The driver of the carriage straightened in his seat for a moment, then twisted around to open the window. Yes, Lady Camilla? We're returning to camp, she told him, but stop the carriage when we're outside the village on the highway. At once, my lady. The man closed the window and faced forward again. As the carriage rolled out of the manor grounds, Clara looked to Ludmilla. It only goes one way, I guess? She asked. I should have realized that as well, Ludmilla frowned. Though this at least has its uses, as long as you don't require a direct response. Actually, I guess I could talk to you from the comfort of my solar, assuming it can work like that. From a test some weeks ago, I found that I was able to convey my words to a subordinate 2 kilometers away. We should give it a try when we get the chance, Clara said with a thoughtful look. This seems both convenient and useful. Leanne and Florine followed their discussion with blank looks. Okay, Leanne said, now you really have to teach us how to do this. It's quite amazing, Florine agreed. Do you think other nobles do it as well? If they do, Ludmilla said, it is not widespread, otherwise the meetings to discuss business between nobles would not happen, more nobles would stay in cities and towns, we would all probably just communicate from our homes to save time. I'm more inclined to believe that it's at most a very well-kept secret only known to a few. Another possibility is that it does happen, but those that use it don't realize what is being done because they employ it as if they are addressing others normally. It's how both Clara and I first learned, as well. It's not something you really notice unless something extraordinary happens, so it just becomes mixed up in our common sense. Once again, the Sorceress Kingdom's way of seeing the world has changed the manner in which we conceptualize what we previously took for granted as what we are. Personally, I would have never dreamed of using it in the ways that I do if they had not come. I might not have even noticed it was an ability at all. This is probably best kept between us, yes? Clara said, at least for now, until we know the full extent of what is possible, and after we've explored its use. Even then, Leanne said, I wouldn't share this knowledge openly. It's a powerful advantage for those who can use it. Imagine how much chaos it would bring if these nobles in Facet County could purposely wield it. It seemed a prudent decision, and everyone nodded in agreement. They felt the carriage slow to a stop. Ludmilla opened the door and stood out to look northwards, but the gentle rise that the highway crossed over blocked any vantage on the town. She looked down to her shadow. Fly up and see if you can spot the town's manor from above, she instructed one of the shadow demons. Ludmilla returned to her seat, awaiting its report. What's going on? Clara asked. Campbell said he sent out his men this morning, Ludmilla answered. I'm hoping that these forest trails they are using slow their pace enough that the shadow demons can be sent to intercept their attack. If we can catch those men en route, we might be able to return to the original plan. The shadow demon hovered back down, floating in the doorway, and Ludmilla turned her attention to it. A trail of smoke, it reported, the manor is ablaze. How far does the smoke extend? It goes south, halfway across the horizon. Good work, she nodded. Stand by for further instructions. The demon lowered itself into the shadows, fading as it concealed itself from regular vision. Ludmilla closed the door of the carriage. She returned to the combined gazes of the other noble women. "So much for that idea," she sighed. "I don't think we can hope for Campbell letting the opportunity to permanently end the dispute get away from him with some foolish desire to gloat over his sister. Jacqueline has either fled, or she is dead." Their faces fell, and the carriage was silent for a moment before Clara pushed their agenda forward. "Then, what do we do now?" she asked. "If Jacqueline is gone and Campbell asserts his authority over Facet County, I can't imagine he would be very receptive with how we just parted ways." Leanne furrowed her brow at Clara's words. "You're still thinking of correcting that filth eater?" she said. "He just murdered his own sister in cold blood, and he seemed quite proud that he ordered it. I highly doubt he will just fall in line." "Not only that," Ludmilla said. "He is going to believe that some great victory has been won, and he won't be coming down off of that high horse anytime soon. If anything, it will further embolden him in his ways, since he has seen a major success. He will proceed to consolidate all of the various elements in the territory under him now that his authority is undisputed. And then he will return to business as usual." Florine's frown deepened. "It's like we've done nothing but help a fragmented opponent unify itself." They were running out of options. All had a good idea of what was to come, but even at this point it was difficult to stomach. "He should at least be waiting on confirmation of his success," Ludmilla said. "We just have to pick up our plan from here and bring in Count Facet while we know where he is, then collect what remains of the nobles that have participated in all this. After that, we'll see what else can be done." She pulled the latch beside her and stepped out onto the highway. Before she closed it again, she turned to address the others. "Make sure you return straight to our encampment," Ludmilla said. "Do not stop until you're safe inside the perimeter. The footmen should have no issues defending their positions if they come after you with the sort that we have seen here. The shadow demon I left there will intervene if things get out of hand." "I'm not worried about us," Clara said. "I'm worried about you." "I'm not," Ludmilla replied. "House Facet never stood a chance in the first place, had they chosen this avenue. Before, I hoped that it would not come to this, though now, I'm almost looking forward to it." Flipping the mask in her hands over one last time, she fastened it on. She felt it shift slightly, reforming to fit her. It was a magic item, but she still could not discern any of its effects. "Well," she said, "how do I look?" There was a moment of silence as she looked between the other noble women. I don't know," Clara finally said. Behind the mask, a mirthless smile appeared on Ludmilla's face. Securing the door and stepping away, she addressed the men, repeating her instructions. They nodded grimly, and the carriage sped away. Watching the vehicle recede into the distance, Ludmilla let out a heavy breath and looked down to her shadow stretching out beneath her in the late afternoon. She couldn't afford any more carelessness. "Escort them back to the camp," she instructed a shadow demon. "I have no idea where Facet's men are, so stay vigilant. Meet me back at the entrance to this village's manor after they are secure in the encampment."